Hi, good morning, everyone. As promised, I am here to tell you all about Trump's new executive order. Again, this is Sasha Westerman Kuning, board certified immigration attorney, and I wanted to give you all of the new information that we know now that Trump has finally published officially his executive order on the suspension of immigration. And I want to start off by saying that if you had watched my prior video from when Trump first tweeted about his intention to implement a new executive order, I had said that I believe that a lot of this was a publicity stunt. It now appears that since we have now seen the final language of the executive order, that this truly is, I would say, more of a publicity stunt than anything. And I'm going to break down exactly why in a minute. Now, the executive order is very narrow. It comes into effect tonight, April 23rd at 11:59 p.m. It will come into effect, so it'll start essentially tomorrow, and it's going to halt people from obtaining new immigrant visas at the U.S. consulates abroad for a period of 60 days. Now, there's a lot of exemptions to that general suspension of immigration into the United States. And I'm going to go through all of those exemptions shortly. But there's a few main points that I wanted to go over first, which is that the order has no impact at all on people who are already in the United States. So anyone applying for what we call adjustment of status for their green cards within the United States, they are completely unaffected by this order, which I had anticipated just from the language of the tweet, which had said into the United States. So that had led me to believe that it likely was not going to affect people that were already in the United States. And it has no effect on people who already are lawful permanent residents. So I had a lot of inquiries from clients who are, doing second green card processing, transitioning their temporary conditional 2-year green cards into permanent 10-year green cards. Anyone who's a green card holder is completely unaffected by this order. And why is that? The order is very clear. At the beginning, there's a whole prelude which discusses why Trump is creating this order. And I want to make clear that it has nothing to do with stopping the spread of coronavirus itself. So many people thought that this executive order was going to be put into place to, help flatten the curve and prevent the spread of coronavirus. It's very clear that it has nothing to do with that. That is not the intention. That is not the goal. It is a purely economic executive order. And the beginning of the executive order has a lot of language about how unemployment in the United States is obviously at a level that we have not seen in recent times due to mass layoffs coming from closures due to coronavirus, and that the purpose of this order is to protect the American workers from what they believe to be new green card holders coming in from outside of the United States and potentially taking what limited jobs we do have left. So it is a protective order regarding the American workforce and jobs, not anything to do with stopping the spread of coronavirus itself. So that needs to be understood to know why it is written the way that it is. So, first of all, stopping anything having to do with adjustment of status, people who are applying for adjustment of status generally already have a work permit during this process. So they're already eligible to work. If there are jobs available, they can work. So it's putting a halt on adjustment of status process would not really do anything to further Trump's goal of helping American workers with unemployment. So they focused on a very narrow group of people, new immigrant visas. Immigrant visas, what we call a green card status that you obtain outside of the U.S. Embassy. The idea behind that is that they don't want new immigrants obtaining their residency at the U.S. consulate and then coming to the United States and getting a job over an American. Now, I'm going to talk about that a little bit more at the end, about why I think that theory is flawed to begin with. But that is the theory behind it, that a new resident would come in and possibly displace an American worker who would get that job. So the order has a lot of exemptions. It only, like I said, applies to people who are obtaining immigrant visas at the U.S. consulate abroad. It does not apply to non-immigrant visa holders. It does not apply to people who are already residents. It doesn't even apply to people who already have an immigrant visa in their passport. So, if I got issued my immigrant visa in February, they're valid for a 6-month period, to be valid until August. I can come in using that valid visa up until the expiration date, no issues at all. So if you already have your visa, you're not affected. It's only for people who have not yet had their consular interviews. Now, I want to segue into why this executive order is essentially a nothing burger, okay? And yes, it's a very legal term that I just used there, nothing burger. But it is truly a nothing burger, and I'm going to tell you why. And this goes back to what I was saying at the beginning about this being a publicity stunt. It's a nothing burger because the U.S. consulates worldwide are 100% closed to non-emergency services. And they did actually talk about this a little bit in the prelude of the executive order, that our consular staff is been lessened by coronavirus, and that they want the consulates to be focusing on, we use the term consulate and embassy kind of interchangeably, but they're two separate entities, usually housed in the same building. The consulate is where people who want to come to the United States go and get services from the U.S. government. The embassy is the part that's for American citizens who are living abroad or traveling abroad in that country to get services. They kind of want to shift the workers to the embassy side, to helping Americans abroad. There still are Americans seeking to be evacuated from certain countries, both workers and visitors and residents there who need the help of the U.S. Embassy to depart the country that they're in. And the beginning of the executive order says that the consulates want to focus on helping Americans abroad versus helping foreigners obtain paperwork to come to the United States. So that's one of the purported goals of the executive order. Now, like I said, the embassies and the consulates have already been closed to everything that is not have to do with either emergency services for American citizens or emergency visa applications for healthcare workers. So, for example, if I was in line for my green card and I am a medical doctor, I can apply for an emergency visa appointment to still get my visa if I'm going to come to the United States and work on, helping treat and diagnose coronavirus cases. So there's still a narrow handful of people who can go to the embassy. It's almost essentially all healthcare workers to get their visas obtained. This executive order doesn't change that, but the embassies are closed for normal processing. The consulate is closed for normal processing. We have not had interviews at the consulate since about March 10th or so. So this already effectively was a halt on immigration from abroad, because there's no way to obtain an immigrant visa at this point unless you fall into that narrow category of healthcare workers. And that is why I've been calling this a nothing burger, because it really not changing anything. People were not able to have their interviews right now, and I did not believe that the embassies were going to open in the next 60 days. I mean, maybe at the 60-day mark we would have been lucky, but for sure they were going to be closed for at least a minimum of 30 more days, maybe more. And so the effect on this is very minimal, since these embassies were already closed, embassies and consulates were already closed to consular services starting back in March. So the effect is really nothing at this point of this executive order. Now, of course, it's for 60 days right now, but they have the right to extend. Now, if they start extending for the economic reasons, because the consulates are closed right now for viral reasons to prevent the spread of the virus, if they continue to close for economic reasons under this executive order, then of course we may start seeing a real impact. But as of right now, there's really no impact, since the U.S. consulates were already closed to standard consular services. Now, I mentioned that there's still a lot of exemptions to this rule. And so if and when, not if, the consulates are going to reopen, of course. When the consulates reopen for normal visa processing, so let's say in 45 days, the consulate in China says we're comfortable. Obviously Asia has really been great at curbing the spread of coronavirus. They say, it's kind of under control here. It's safe to reopen. Then, for example, people who don't fall under this exemption, because that 60-day suspension will still be in place, will not be able to get a immigrant visa appointment. Those who fall into the exemption will be able to get their appointment. And those exemptions are all EB-5 cases. So if it's an EB-5 investor case, which, our office handles hundreds of EB-5 investor cases a year. So this is a huge part of our client base. EB-5 investors are exempted from this suspension. Again, this goes back to the economic part of the order. EB-5 program is a job creation program. The investment that the person made has to lead to at least 10 jobs being created in the United States. So if the idea is to curb unemployment, obviously you want EB-5 investors to continue to be able to come to the United States since they are part of a job creation program. It will not apply to spouses of United States citizens and minor children of United States citizens. So if the embassies and the consulates reopen before the 60-day mark, people who are spouses of U.S. citizens and children of U.S. citizens will be able to go and get their immigrant visas issued. It also it doesn't apply to the healthcare workers who are already able to get emergency visa appointments right now if they fall into a category of planning to help with coronavirus. It does apply to everybody else. So all the employment-based cases that are coming through the consulate, all of what we call the preference categories. Those are, for example, spouses of residents, brothers and sisters of U.S. citizens, adult children of U.S. citizens. Their visas will be on hold for the 60-day suspension. So there is a category of people that will be affected. The important thing to know about those kind of cases is that the wait times in many of those categories are already tremendous. I mean, the wait time for a brother or sister of a U.S. citizen averages 14 years. So these are people who have already been in line for 14 years for their green cards. So, not to say this in an insensitive way, but, should they have to wait a few more months, they've already been waiting for 14 years. So it's a few months on to that 14-year wait time has such a minimal effect overall. I do think the people that are going to be affected the most negatively by this order is people who are spouses of residents, of green card holders, unlike spouses of U.S. citizens who are exempt from the order. Spouses of residents fall under the order. And so, there's already about a 2-year wait time to bring your spouse to the United States if you are a green card holder or a resident, and being apart from your spouse for 2 years is obviously very devastating on a lot of couples. Adding even a few extra months to that will have a significant emotional impact on those couples. So hopefully, it won't go beyond that 60-day mark, and hopefully the embassies themselves will be ready to reopen in 60 days, which there's still a question about that alone. But overall, it really has a very limited impact. It's very short, 60 days. Like I said, it can be extended, but the amount of people it's going to impact, is not tremendous. And like I said, most of those people have already been in significant wait times. So, overall, it stinks. Don't get me wrong. It stinks to have to wait a few extra months when you've already been waiting years and years and years. And especially, there is an emotional aspect to finally getting to the front of that line and then being told that now there's a hold on your case. I am very sympathetic to that, but overall, unfortunately having to wait a few extra months to get your visa, it's not going to be the end of the world. So the executive order was much better than what I thought it would be. and much more limited than I think people thought it was going to be. They thought it was going to be much more broad-reaching, and we are lucky that it you know I have a question over here. What about fiance visas? So fiance visas are considered non-immigrant visas, which have not been touched at all. So assuming that the embassies and the consulates reopen, which is the overall question is about when is the consulates going to reopen? Because the order means nothing if the embassies are closed. 60 days could go by, they could lift the order, and the consulates can still be closed to interviews. So when are the consulates going to reopen should be the real question that everybody's asking. But fiance visas, the K-1 visa is classified as a non-immigrant visa legally, and non-immigrant visas are not affected by the order at all. So assuming that the consulates reopen, people are going to be able to go and apply for their K-1 visas, their B-1, B-2 visitor visas. There is a note in the end of the order which says that they should review the non-immigrant visa categories too. So it does look like they will try, if they're legally able to, suspend some of the non-immigrant visa categories, that they will. But again, the goal of this order is about unemployment for Americans. So it's rumored that if they go after the non-immigrant visa categories, it's going to be very specific non-immigrant visa categories that have to do with work. Because they don't want to bring in foreign workers to take American jobs. So, people are thinking that maybe H-1B visas, our professional worker visas will be impacted by that. That maybe L visas, which are multinational executives and managers and specialized employees of multinational corporations, that they could be affected. Maybe E-visa employees. I don't think E-visa treaty investors will get affected because they're opening businesses and creating jobs in the United States, so it would make sense. But e-visa investors are able to bring over employees from their home country. I think they may block those home country employees. So, we may eventually, if they are legally able to do it, try to block some of these employment-based non-immigrant visa categories. So I don't think they'll go after fiancés of U.S. citizens, since spouses of U.S. citizens are already exempt from the original order, and it doesn't make any sense to go after those people. Now, someone is mentioning in the comments parents of U.S. citizens. Now, parents of U.S. citizens did not get exempted from the order, so their cases are going to be on hold. And frankly, since Trump became the president, they've been going after parents of U.S. citizens. They've been wanting to get rid of that category. They talked about getting rid of that category in its entirety, but it's part of the Immigration and Nationality Act, so it requires a congressional bill to be passed by both the House and the Senate to remove parents of U.S. citizens. I don't anticipate that really ever happening, but they've been trying to narrow parents of U.S. citizens through the public charge rules. They've really come after parents under the public charge rules, especially when they are elderly, basically saying that this elderly person's not going to work and they could become a burden on the U.S. government. And they've been denying a lot of immigrant visas to people over 65 who are parents of U.S. citizens on those public charge grounds. So you can see here that their contempt for parents of U.S. citizens, even though we all know Melania Trump petitioned for her parents, so it's so hypocritical for them to be going after parents of U.S. citizens. But they do want to stop immigration of parents of U.S. citizens as much as they possibly can. So, if the person is at the front of the line for an immigrant visa interview and the consulates reopen and this ban is still in place, parents of U.S. citizens are not going to have interviews. But, this executive order has, there's a question here that I want to address in the comments about processing. This has no impact on processing. There's nothing that suspends the processing of these cases. So we should expect that if you want to file for your parents, if you want to file for your brother and sister, USCIS in the United States is going to take that petition. They're going to adjudicate it. We are getting decisions on cases every single day because the service centers, are completely open. The local offices are open, not for interviews, but for decisions on cases. And we're actually getting a lot of decisions right now on cases that have been pending for years and years and years, because now the officers are actually able to catch up on those long pending cases, where they didn't have time before because they were constantly interviewing new cases. So there's actually been an advantage to them being closed to a certain degree, and they, have not been able to, or they're able to continue with all of that processing because they now have more time in the local offices. I'm getting another question here, and thank you guys all for all of your excellent questions. I love, being able to do these live interactions and actually be able to answer your questions here in the here and now. So, I'm just going to read this question, that this person's parent has their package and their approval from the U.S. consulate ready to fly. So as long as they can get a flight, I know this person, so I know that their father is likely in Colombia, and I believe that Colombia has all of its international flights canceled. So it's a matter of just the airports reopening. But the executive order specifically says if you have your immigrant visa already in your passport, you are exempted from this suspension. So as long as the person can physically get the flight and get here before that immigrant visa expires, they'll have no issues. Now, if the immigrant visa expires, there's been talk, this has been presented to the Department of State. What are we going to do with all of these people whose immigrant visas are going to expire? They're only issued for 6 months, but could not get flights to the United States because of travel restrictions. There's actually been no official guidance, and we're really trying. When I say we, I'm talking about the American Immigration Lawyers Association, has been putting a lot of pressure on the Department of State to, advise people of what to do in this situation. There is, I read the law on this just the other day, and there is a provision that says that if there's completely circumstances beyond the control of the applicant, which prevents them from entering the U.S. before that 6-month immigrant visa expires, that the consulate can reissue the visa. And obviously, of course, we're going to argue that all of this is completely beyond the control of the applicant. Obviously, if you especially are from a country where the airports are completely closed to international travel, of course, it's beyond your control that you cannot get to the United States. So we do expect the consulate to eventually put a procedure in place, but they don't deal with that issue on a very regular basis. So there's a question how they will actually handle all of this. The law seems to indicate that the person will have to repay their visa fees and will have to, redo a medical exam if the medical exam has expired, redo fingerprints if the fingerprints have expired. So they're really going to have to look at it on an individual basis and tell each individual person how to proceed once their visa has expired. But it does appear that everyone's going to have to pay their immigrant visa fees again to pay for the reissuance of the visa. It just depends on what else they're going to have to do. But the American Immigration Lawyers Association is working with the Department of State to try to get some fixed procedure into place for the anticipated reopening of the consulates and all of these people who are going to have this issue of having expired immigrant visas. I have a question here about the people not receiving their stimulus checks that are in a mixed household. And if you had watched my video a week or two ago, talking about unemployment and corona and stimulus checks, I had mentioned this in my video that the law was very clear that it's not just spouses. So for example, if my tax return has either a spouse or a dependent who has what we call an ITIN, a tax ID number versus a social security number, that entire family gets disqualified from a stimulus check. So it's really terrible. It's a terrible rule. I think there are maybe someone actually litigating it because of how unfair it is. If your spouse does not have a social and only has an ITIN and you're on the tax return with that person, the U.S. citizen is not going to get a stimulus check as well. So, they're punishing U.S. citizens who have relationships, either children or spouses, who do not have legal status and do not have social security numbers. So, that's just unfortunately the way that the rule was written, and unless it gets overturned through litigation, those Americans are going to miss out on their stimulus checks, and it's such a shame because people don't choose who they fall in love with. They don't choose to fall in love with someone who doesn't have a social security number, and these people are doing the right thing by filing their taxes and including the spouse with a tax ID number, and now they're going to get penalized for it. So that's an unfortunate effect. Oh, so yeah, I'm having a question here about adjustment of status. Whether there's delays in it. Of course, there are delays in adjustment of status. USCIS is closed for interviews the same way the consulate is. If you follow my videos regularly, you know that I was discussing that officially USCIS is closed until May 4th for interviews, but that I have received cancellation notices for interviews that were scheduled in the middle of May. So it appears that they may extend that closure. Now, if you're filing your case now, it's probably going to have minimal impact, but the reality is that they're going to have a minimum of almost 2 full months of not interviewing. And, for a place like, for example, down here in South Florida, the Miami field office, I don't know the exact numbers, but I can tell you when I'm sitting there in the waiting room, it feels like they must interview between 100 to 200 people a day minimum. It could be more than that. It's hard to keep track, but it's a constant. I mean, the door opens every few minutes calling a new name with a new person, and there's, dozens of officers, doing dozens of cases a day. So just mathematically, it has to be, at least 100 to 200. So if you're missing out on 100 to 200 interviews a day, then of course there's going to be a huge backup in the interview lines. They go in the order that the cases are received, so they have to reschedule everybody who was canceled first, and then start with the line in the order of receipt, and start scheduling interviews. So yeah, I do think adjustment of status processing times are going to increase because of at least a 2-month closure at USCIS on interviews. The benefit of adjustment of status versus doing the immigrant visa process abroad is that the person's in the United States and has their work permit and their travel permit and all of this while they're waiting for their green card interview. So, I mean, they're living a pretty normal life, with a social, with a driver's license, with a work permit, a travel permit, while they're waiting for that green card interview. So, as much as it, again, stinks to have to wait longer for your green card interview, and getting the final result on your case, the reality is that on a day-to-day impact, it's not going to impact greatly, people that are inside of the United States. It's much worse, obviously. I mentioned that the rule exempts spouses of U.S. citizens who are coming into the United States, but the consular closure affects everybody equally. And so there are people, who have their U.S. citizens who have their spouses outside of the United States who, are going to have to wait extra months just because of consular closures. I had, very unfortunately, the second week of March, I had 2 immigrant visa cases that were scheduled for interviews. One is the parent of a U.S. citizen, one is the spouse of a resident. And, they actually both showed up for their interviews and were told that the consulate had just closed one of them didn't show up because it was Italy and they had already publicly announced that the consulate was closed. So he never went to his interview. The other one was in Jamaica, and she actually went to her interview, but the consulate had closed for interviews the afternoon before that, and they never notified her. And now it looks like if the consulate reopens within the 60 days, for both of those people, because one is a spouse of a resident and one is a parent of a U.S. citizen, they cannot get rescheduled right away if it's within the 60-day executive order, because they don't fall into the exemption. So they just need to hope that that does not get extended for the 60 days, or they're going to have to keep on waiting. So yeah, there's definitely going to be a lot of people impacted by this if it goes beyond the 60 days. Like I said, the first 60 days, I don't really see too much of an impact, since the consulates were likely going to be closed for the 60 days. I just got an email from Kingston, Jamaica yesterday, and about that immigrant visa interview. And, they said, as soon as things get back to normalcy, we will reset the interview. I don't think they had gotten the language yet of the executive order and realized that this woman cannot get interviewed because of the fact that she is a parent of a U.S. citizen. But actually, I liked what they said. I pulled up the email here. It says, I had told them my client's email address had been updated. So I told them, this is the new email address. When you send the new interview, please, use the new email address so the person gets notified of the interview. And it's a good day. We have noted the new email address and await some normalcy to continue the process. Regards, Kingston Immigrant Visa Unit. And so I like that they were said await some normalcy. I'm like, well, how long will that be until we get back to some normalcy? But it's hopefully not going to be too much longer until we get back to the normalcy, at least on when we talk about flattening the curve and preventing the spread of the virus, which is what is preventing the consulates from being open. So we have the consulates being closed because of viral spread, but we have the executive order issued to protect unemployment in the United States. So they're doing two completely different things. So anyways, thank you all again for all of your wonderful questions. And, it's, I love to say hello to everybody, Yuri, Usal, Julin. Thank you guys all for listening. And this video is going to get posted here and onto my YouTube page. And I've been telling everyone, please subscribe, follow. I'm not just asking that so I can have a lot of followers, although that's, secretly the goal, but no, I'm just kidding. It really is because everything is changing so much all the time. And, this is the fastest way for me to get the information out to as many people as possible. And I'm going to try to always be letting you guys know as soon as anything changes, anything comes in, as soon as we know the consulates are reopened, you will hear it here first. Okay. All right, everyone. Thank you again. Take care. Have a wonderful day. Stay safe, stay healthy. And, hopefully, like Kingston said, we'll have some normalcy soon. Take care, guys. Bye.